Welcome to the Reclaim Your Body interview series. On this episode, our guest is Amy Pershing. Amy is the founder of Bodywise binge eating disorder program and the clinical director for the Center for Eating Disorders out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Based on 30 years of clinical experience, Amy has pioneered a treatment approach for BED that is strength-based, incorporating internal family systems and somatic trauma techniques. Her approach also integrates attuned eating and movement and the health at every size philosophy. Amy is the creator of Hungry Wise, the author of her book, Binge Eating Disorder, The Journey to Recovery and Beyond. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you, Mordechai.
It was a real pleasure to have you on with us today. And I'd love to start by asking you, where did your passion come from around binge eating? You know, you have this idea about allowing our bodies to dictate the size that our bodies want to be, and where did this passion come from?
I have a long history with dieting and weight, and I started dieting with my mom, actually, when I was about 7 years old, and I remember it very clearly. We went on Scarsdale, and I remember weighing and measuring our cottage cheese and our pineapple, and we were there in our tab. We had our tab, and we were, the goal was obviously to be smaller. And I was still growing. I was a little girl, but I was considered overweight by my family physician. My mother had been considered overweight as well when she was a little girl. And so, with the best of intentions, the idea was that I already needed to fix this, that it was already not doing what it was supposed to do. And that started a long history of dieting and losing weight, regaining it, dieting, losing weight, regaining it over and over and over again. And then when I hit about junior high, I started to develop a binge eating disorder. So I was dieting, but I was hiding food and secretly binging. And that pattern continued on into college. And then I took a psych class, and I sort of said, wait a second, there's more to this relationship with food than I had thought. And so I started to learn more, and then I got into therapy, and then I realized, wait a minute, there's been something very protective actually about my relationship with food, and I need to explore this. And so that's really how it got started for me. It's a very personal journey.
Yeah, it sounds like that. And so when you discovered that, what was your next step?
Well, my next step, I went on to graduate school in psychology, and I thought, well, I had eating disorder treatment, but still what I found in eating disorder treatment was that still ultimately the goal was to try to get me to be able to stop binging, not a bad thing, but then ultimately to be able to stick to my diet. That was still kind of the underlying narrative, was that ultimately when you get past this eating disorder, you'll be able to fix what's wrong at last. So essentially it was prescribing a symptom. And so I knew that wasn't right, but I didn't know what was right. And ultimately where my ideas came from really started with giving up, actually. I just gave up on the idea that I was going to be able, through behavioral weight loss, to fix what was wrong. I still had the idea that this was not what it should be. I knew I knew a diet was not going to change that. So it really was kind of coming up with what else? What actually would work? And for me at that time, working meant weight loss. What I've come to understand over time is that working actually means that I trust my body, which was a very different space than what I had been taught from the very beginning.
And this is about 30 or so years ago when you discovered this. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question to you is, learning to trust your body is a long-term process. And generally when we have something around binge eating or food addiction or something that we feel like we can't control, our need is, a very immediate one. So how does somebody who's, how do you go from trusting your body to, how do you get to trusting your body from the actual needs of getting control over this, compulsion of sorts?
Yeah, Mordechai, I think that is a wonderful question, because, so much of our setup around this is that the way best deal with the problem is to get control over it.
Right.
And I think part of that narrative is fed by the idea that I'm in control on a diet, and then as soon as it stops, I go crazy and I eat kind of everything in sight. Ergo, I'm out of control when I'm not on a diet. What I would suggest is that whole on the diet, off the diet thing is actually, we need to remove that whole paradigm. And we need to challenge this idea that our body is something to be controlled, and instead consider that our body is something to be listened to. What I find interesting, I've done obviously lots of talks on this topic, and I usually ask my audience, depending on the talk, but I usually ask my audience, how many people are aware when they're hungry? It's a tiny percentage usually. I'll ask how many people are aware when they're full. Tiny percentage. It's striking to me that so many of us have no idea when our body is hungry, when it's full. And I think kind of we can extrapolate to when it's tired, when it's, when it needs any of a number of physical things, when it's what our emotions are. We're very disconnected in many ways. So I think, again, that idea that our job is to control this is actually part of the problem. That in seeking to control it, it's a little bit like, from my perspective, wanting our head to kind of be in charge of everything. I don't think that's a very peaceful way to live, because essentially it sets up a struggle, right? That when my head and my body are out of sync, if my head says, it's not time for you to eat yet, it's not lunchtime, and my body says, I'm hungry, right? Now I have internally, my job is to not hear me. I don't think that sets up a good internal narrative. I think it reinforces the shame and the disconnect that so many of us are taught to live with. And I don't think that's worked so well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, I'm thinking about, as you're saying this, how true it is, how we create all these structures and frameworks in our lives, right? To have what we want to have, our desires. And life, with around food especially, there's all these, you walk into the grocery store and you're drawn to, very deliciously tasting products that are manufactured and full of chemicals and sugar, and that you feel craving towards. And you're driving down the street and you see, pizza stores or billboards for foods that are unhealthy, right? They're completely unhealthy. You go to get a coffee, there's donuts and there's pastries that are, they're things that aren't going to make us feel good, right? They're not going to give us energy. They're going to make us, So we create these frameworks and structures possibly because, if I was listening to my body, maybe when I would walk into the coffee shop, right, I would actually just order a cookie with my coffee. My body would be like, hey, does my body want that? Or is my brain just saying that? So it's like, when it's not so quiet, it's hard to listen, right? So if we lived in the jungle or in nature, it'd be very easy to hear what our bodies are communicating. But I think it can be difficult, especially in a city or when there's lots of stores and lots of noise.
I absolutely agree, Mordechai. It is very much a process of, I think, of working on that mindfulness, that link of being able to really get to know what does my body say? What is its language, right? You're absolutely right. When we walk into that Starbucks and here's a big cookie, or here's the, whatever it is, and it looks tantalizing and wonderful. I think it also has a charge around it because it's forbidden.
Yes.
Right? That it's something that it's for our cheat day, or it's something, that we shouldn't be having that. And so as soon as we're off the diet, right, we're drawn to that food. Or if we're particularly hungry, right, we see that, and we can certainly talk more about this if you like, but there are a number of processes that our body enacts when we're hungry to draw us toward food, particularly food that's easily digested and has a lot of energy, which is essentially chemically manipulated foods, right? And so we're particularly drawn toward those. But what I found over time in doing this process is that truly, if I'm paying attention, my body doesn't feel good eating very much of those foods. A few bites, yes. I believe in vitamin J, right? Which is joy, right?
Love
That
that. Vitamin J. I haven't heard that one before.
vitamin J, that sometimes food is just about joy or celebration or tradition. And that's wonderful. If you're fortunate enough to have access to good foods and to be able to afford to have them, it's a wonderful way of celebrating connection and just enjoying being a physical being. So I think that's actually really important, which is part of why I don't have the good food, bad food lists. What I do have is paying attention lists. How do different foods feel in my body and how do I want to feel, right? I know, just as an example, I love pancakes and waffles. I love them. But I know that if I eat that before I have clients, for example, not going to be a good thing. I'm going to be sleepy. I'm not going to be attentive. So I know, just that, that's sort of a silly example, but that's one of the kinds of rules that I know about my own body, but that might be different for someone else. So again, that's why I think we need to think about the expert in each of us. The expert is in here, not out there.
Sure. So you're saying what I'm hearing you say is tap into what your body is craving, not what your mind is trying to, like, what do you, but I guess you're still using your mind in that situation, because you're saying to yourself, I want to have energy for my clients.
That's right.
So I'm going to, so it's still really a mind decision. You're not entirely listening to your body, right?
It's both. Yeah, I think so. When I work with clients, a lot of what we do is actually develop a catalog, kind of. We develop or an owner's manual, let's say, for their unique experiences with food. And so we get to know kind of, okay, how does my body react to different foods? What do I need on a winter's day versus a summer afternoon? Are they different? What if I have a strong, like a tough workout versus what if I just did some stretching? What do I notice my body might want or need? And we get to know that over time. And that's a good guide. It doesn't mean that we've blown it, that we've failed if we choose to not follow those rules in any given time. But we have them. We get to know what our body needs. So it's both. I think it's really an alchemy of our head, that is knowing the wisdom of having lived in our body, right? And our body itself in that moment, right? What would be good right now?
Yeah, I guess on the one hand, like if I never want to have that kind of energy where there's low energy, then I'm never going to want to have to your example, I'm never going to have a pancake, because if I always want to feel great, then so is that considered, is that going to the diet bucket? Because I am restricting myself to some extent, because I'm like, all right, no pancakes for me, even though there's been a time in my life where I love pancakes and maple syrup, who hasn't, right? But now I just would never have that, because to me that's going to make me feel a certain way, and I know that's going to activate all the neurons and the ways of thinking for craving other foods that are sugary and sweet, and what I don't want to crave, because I know that's a slippery slope for me personally. So when you say an owner's manual, do you mean, so this is my owner's manual, I guess, to an extent?
That's right.
I don't follow a diet. I just know, at this point in my life, I just know what makes me feel good and how I want to function, and that's how I optimize my life.
Yeah, Mordechai, I think that's a great way to say it. So, for example, that might be the best relationship for you with
Right.
pancakes, right? But for me, I know that I don't like to have them on Monday morning.
Right.
But my husband makes the best chocolate chip pancakes on earth, and I love to have those on Sunday mornings on occasion. The difference is I don't like them very often, actually, because they're heavy and they still make me kind of sluggish, and I'm not crazy about that feeling. So I don't like them often. And actually, when I eat them, I used to eat them all because this is my big chance before Monday, right? But now I eat a little bit because that's actually enough.
Right.
So I know that it's a food I don't like to eat a lot of.
Right. So you're saying tap into the place of the way you want to feel versus I'm allowed or not allowed. Tap into the place where the way the food is going to make you feel. That way you're making a decision from your body as opposed to your mind or restriction.
That's exactly right. And I think that's particularly powerful for clients with eating disorders, which is obviously my particular interest, because for those clients, so much of what they've been taught is that distrust and that shame body too. And often too, they have other issues that drive that relationship with food. So they might have histories of trauma and various other experiences that have taught them that, they're not okay fundamentally, right? That there's something really wrong with them. And that relationship with food has often been a way to soothe or to protect or to distract, to take care of themselves. So a big part of recovery often for them is to learn that, in fact, their body is a source of incredible information and protection and safety, not a source of shame.
Right. So how do you help somebody no, binge eating and weight loss are two separate things. You don't have to necessarily lose weight if you're a binge eater. So let's talk about somebody who does want to lose weight, right? And that's the cause of their pain, or that's what they think the cause of their pain is anyways, right? It's a symptom. We can get into that conversation another time, but how do you slow somebody down to realize that listening to your body is the way to achieve the freedom that you'd like, right? Listening to your body, and the weight is going to come off, like you talk about and you teach at its pace, at the pace that your body wants to lose the weight. Focus on what your body desires right now, right? So how do you help somebody understand that? Because, like we spoke about a few minutes ago, it's painful to be, overweight, especially if you're, I guess I don't want it to make a difference if you're 10 pounds or 100 pounds because it's irrelevant. But if you're not feeling great in your body and you feel like you're overweight, you want to do something about that right away. And I think listening to your body and trusting is a process.
I would absolutely agree with you. So, and that happens quite frequently, that I have someone come into my office and they sit down and they say, okay, I want to get rid of this weight. I've tried a million different diets. What do I do? How do I make this better? Whether or not they have an eating disorder, it's different if they do, but some of the things are the same. And this is where it's the same. So part of, and this is very much a process, but as you said, but part of how I work with people is to find out a number of things. One is to think about the meaning of weight loss for them. What is it that feels like it will change with weight loss? And sometimes for people, it's very much a physical, it's their movement in the world, like just physically how they are in their bodies. But often it's also very much connected to messaging about what their body is supposed to be. So what I find is that, people come in and they have a number in their head, or they have a pant size, or they have, some idea about this is what my body ought to be. And usually it's very old, right? It's a long-standing goal. They probably have 5 wardrobes, 5 sizes in their closet, going up and down, trying to get this holy grail of the number. And so part of what I talk about is that urgency, that sense of, I have to fix this right now. Because what I find is often true is that, and it's maybe very different for you, but for the people that I see, very often that has a lot of shame behind it. It has long histories of weight-related bullying, weight stigma experiences, of being treated badly in stores or on airplanes or at the doctor's office. And so I think part of it, when clients come in and they're in that frantic space, it's not just about weight, but it's about wanting to make shame stop. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. So I think part of what I want to help clients do is to figure out how to do that in the best way possible. And what I know is that behavioral weight loss, the vast majority of the time, results in weight gain, right? Because our body adapts. So ultimately, I think that process really needs to be part of that recovery, that we can't sort of say, okay, we'll lose a bunch of weight and then we'll do it later. But then we'll heal your relationship with your body later. I think that healing is a significant part of your body ultimately going wherever it wants to go, but being the strongest and the healthiest it can be, because you're paying attention and honoring those cues. So I don't want clients to start out with a process that isn't honoring of those cues and then switch to one that is, right? I think we can start that actually from the beginning, right?
So how do you help somebody understand that? What's the actual process to
to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge, I mean, it's a 180 for most people.
Yeah, it's everything science doesn't tell us.
Right? Absolutely. It is a 180. So a big part of what I do is actually share the research. I help clients know what happens in their body when, for example, when they restrict their intake, when they're on a diet that asks them to sustain hunger. What does their body do as a result? Our body fights back against that. And typically my clients think of that as, there's something that's a willpower issue, right? That if I'm just tough enough, I can make this work. And actually what we find is that, and I know this because I've, from my experience, have a history of dieting since I was 7, so I always joke that I've gained and lost a Volkswagen Bug.
Wow.
It's like 2,000, literally over and over and over and over again, same bug up and down, right? So what I've learned is that if we can learn what happens when we ask our body to go against what it's saying, we're not honoring what it's asking for, what happens. So that's one thing. The other thing I talk about with clients, because most of the clients that I have who come in, maybe who don't have an eating disorder, even if they don't have an eating disorder, they often have that either I'm on a diet or I'm off a diet, right? So they're either restricting or they're not paying any attention.
That feels like a disorder to me.
It does to me too. I think
We've both been there for many years, so.
I've been there for many years, absolutely. And I find those two things are part of the same dance. So that's where I go back to that idea that for me, it's important to have pancakes when I want to have pancakes, but I need to know when I want to have pancakes and when I'm done. And so that's a lot of the work I do with clients, is helping them know that and learn that.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and it's a big gift. I think that's the only way to achieve long-term success. And I'm sure you've heard the stats before that most people lose weight gain it back. Somewhere between 95 and 98% of people lose weight gain it back. And so in your mind, what are the main drivers to that?
For the weight gain, for the weight coming back on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a number of things. When we're on a weight, or when we're on a food reduction program, that is when we're sustaining hunger. That's kind of how we think about a diet, right? So if you think about a diet asks us to eat less than our body calls for, right? Or to stop before it's finished, if we think about it that way. So I think ultimately what happens, there are a number of things that happen. One is the hormones that tell us we're full decrease when we're sustaining hunger. And the hormones that tell us that we're hungry actually increase. So we are less satisfied with the same amount of food. So our body is pushing back.
Wow.
Also, our body gets extremely efficient because, again, our body doesn't know the difference between a diet and a famine, right? So if I think about my diet history, as far as my body's concerned, I've survived the potato crop failure about 200 times. That's how my body sees it. And so it's very good over that time at being very efficient. So over time, we actually want more food and need less food. And that's the dieter's plateau, right? Where we kind of hit that place that we can't lose any more weight typically. And so we reduce calories even further and our body gets even more efficient. So ultimately, what happens? Oh, and we also have some really fascinating research that looks at the cues that our brain sends for our taste buds to begin to shut down when we're sated, actually lessen when we're on a diet. So that is, food tastes better longer. So again, everything, people think about food more. They have more food thoughts, and we know that from the eating disorder research. So kind of everything about who we are is pushing us to food when we're hungry. Again, if that wasn't true, you and I wouldn't be sitting here talking.
Right.
So I think we need to frame that as the good news, actually. That's why we're here. But what happens when we do that behavioral restriction, when we do that on purpose, at some point when we inevitably go off of that, system, because everything's driving us to go off of it, we start putting on weight very quickly. And that's that kind of, most people weight, but depending on the study, it's between 70 and 82 or something percent actually gain back more than they lost.
Wow.
So if you look over time, it's like the very best way to gain weight for most people is a diet, right? Because over time it goes up. Right? So, and our body's designed to do that, again, because it doesn't know when the next famine is heading our way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think all diets with any type of restriction is going to make you want the thing more. That's how I came with my theory about the reverse approach. Was always like, do everything that the diets don't tell you to do. Do things really slowly, understand, create new small changes over a longer period of time. And that way creating these new patterns and new habits that give you the long-term success that you want to have. And I think there's, we live in this immediacy society where we need everything right away. And, as quick as you lose the weight, when you lose it quickly, you're going to gain it right back. So I think it's really interesting how we're both coming at this.
Yeah. The other piece in there too, Mordechai, that I think is so important is, particularly for the clients that I see, we know that with binge eating disorder affects about 3 million adults. It's by far and away the most common eating disorder. There's some research that suggests that for people seeking bariatric interventions, 60 to 70% of them are diagnosable with binge eating disorder. So one of the things I think also we have to look at within the population of people who might be chronic dieters is there a binge eating disorder? Is there some relationship with food that we also have to psychologically consider as well as physiologically consider? Right? If that relationship with food is protecting or soothing or distracting that person, giving them a place to deal with whatever their experiences might be, and we just try to remove that with a diet, it would actually be unexpected if they were able to stay on that diet just for psychological reasons, much less the physiological ones, because that food is so important. So that's also, I think we have to consider that in that mix too.
So binge eating and dieting are two different things, right?
Yeah, there are lots of people with binge eating disorder who have significant dieting histories. There are lots of people who diet who don't have binge eating disorder or an eating disorder at all. They may have disordered eating, because for the most part, we all do, right? But they may not have a clinical eating disorder. But I simply say that I think it's important because it's common. Binge eating disorder is common. And so I think we want to be able to consider, when we're thinking about how can I take the very best care of my body, what roles does food play for me?
Sure. Yeah, so can you talk about the attuned eating movement thing that you teach very much?
Sure. Yeah. So there are a number of steps. I have a program that I've developed that's a number of steps. And basically what it invites people to do, like I said, is to begin to develop that owner's manual, right? So what we start with is even just getting to know what's the diet mythology that we're carrying around. And sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's not so subtle. So for example, if I'm out at a restaurant with my friends and I say, I'm going to be good today and order the salad, right? That's diet mythology, right? Or let's cheat and get the dessert, right? So all that moral sort of encoding around food is an example. Or assessing whether you had a good day or a bad day based on whether or not you followed the rules, right? So there are a lot of those narratives. Losing weight at the end of a week means you had a successful week. If you didn't, it means you had a failure, right? So setting up that whole sort of story about I'm either doing okay or I failed, which is a really common narrative in so much of our lives. So a big part of it is recognizing when we're doing that and beginning to challenge some of those stories, right? Beginning to say, wait a minute, suppose, and there's a lot of ways to do that, but ultimately leading to, when I hear that narrative, can I check in and see, what does my body have to say right now? How does my body feel about this particular food choice, or whether or not I'm hungry or full? And then we work on kind of the mechanics. When am I hungry? What does that feel like in my body? How do I know? I talk about hunger as a scale. Really, it's kind of a 1 to 10 scale. 1 is I'm not hungry, and 10 is I'm over hungry, like just as hungry as you can imagine. And so we try to think about, can we land in there around a 4 to a 6? That's really when our body is going to be, needs food, but it's not over hungry. When we're over hungry, again, we activate all of those things that drive us to eat and not really to pay attention to satiety. Help clients learn about fullness. When are you full? What does full feel like? A few bites versus the end of the worst binge you can imagine. Where are you in there? Where do you want to be? What does that feel like? How do you know? So it's a lot of mindfulness and building awareness for clients. I work on attuned movement as well, because we have a lot of that mythology around working out as well, that there's a certain number of reps or a certain way to do it or a certain amount of time. And if you don't do that, it doesn't count. I really like the idea of movement being about joy again. We have so much movement is about, has this other goal attached to it. And that there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But if that goal is coming from a place of, let's say, wanting to strengthen your body, like, I enjoy using a boxing bag. I just like doing that. It feels good to me to do that. So, think about, I do that until I'm done. So I have no idea how long I go. I don't know. Sometimes it's a long time. Sometimes it's not a very long time. I go until my body feels like it's had enough of that. So I like to help clients figure that out too for themselves. How does their body like to move? What is authentic and intuitive for them?
Sure.
Here we go.
And how do you help clients to understand the relationship with the scale and what to do about it?
Great question. It's a great question. I think so much of that scale piece. To encapsulate it, what I say to clients most often is, if stepping on the scale is going to change how you feel about your body or about yourself, don't do it. The risk is too high. Right? The risk is too high. That number tells us very little about what's going on in our body. It fluctuates a lot, for one thing. We really don't have a particular weight. We have more of a range, typically, a set point range where our body is the most happy. And research suggests that for someone who weighs, let's say, 150 pounds, that their actual weight is a 15-pound range, and it goes up and down. So it varies. So that particular number really isn't telling us a whole lot, except, how strong the pull of gravity is on you right in that moment. Really, that's what it's telling us. So we have a lot of charge, though, around the numbers. BMI has made that even worse. BMI was never intended to be used with individual people. It was a big number scale, so it was looking at big data. It was never intended to be used for individuals.
Wow.
But it has been, and part of the reason for that is because it significantly favors insurance companies. So it bumps rates up, really based on nothing. When they started doing BMI, literally overnight, it's like 50 million people got shifted into a category that pathologized their body, regardless of any other health data. Well, that doesn't make sense, especially if people really do come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. So I think we have to be really careful about giving much cred to that number. Now, insurance companies give a lot of cred to that number. Docs are taught to give a lot of cred to that number. So I think we have to do a lot of education for the people around us, and keep working on the idea that the number is a lot less important than, how's your body doing? How's it feeling? What's going on? Are you able to move? Do your muscles feel good? Or do you eat mostly when you're hungry and stop mostly when you're full? Are you eating a wide array of foods and feeling satisfied and enjoying them? Right? Does that make sense?
So do you weigh yourself?
Never.
Never. But you've lost some weight over the years as well and kept it off.
Yeah, when I started when I gave up dieting, And I said, I don't know what else to do. I'm just gonna eat when I'm hungry. I give up.
Right.
It's like, I can't do this anymore. And so that was really what I did. And over probably a decade, it was a long time. I lost quite a bit of weight, and my body just stabilized. But I would absolutely be considered clinically, but based on BMI, I'm in the overweight category. No question. But I know this is where my body wants to be. My weight is stable and has been for a long time. I mean, as far as I can tell. But no, I don't get on the scale. And actually I avoid knowing the number. My doc doesn't, she makes up a number because I don't let her weigh me. So.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, I think getting free of that is a true freedom. Just measuring yourself by the way you really feel. Are there some actual mechanical ways that you advise your clients to do that?
To advise them
to measure themselves by the way they feel, as opposed to letting the scale dictate how they should feel about themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's one of the things I sometimes, a lot of times when clients first come in, they're in many ways disconnected from how they feel about their life. And so I do a little screening kind of, or check-in, not screening, but a check-in tool called PIES. It's physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And I encourage people just, a few times during the day, set the alarm on your phone or, whatever, and check in. How are you? We don't do that typically. We're just running and going and doing. We're on the phone. We're doing this. We're doing that. We're not checked in. So that's a big part of it, is to invite people to really just see how you are. It doesn't take very long. I do it myself during the day. It literally takes about 30 seconds. I can get a sense of what it is that my body may be needing, or what's going on with my feelings, what I'm thinking about. It's kind of just a short state of the union. But that's one of the ways that I invite clients to see how's your well-being?
Right.
How are you feeling? Right? Because we think about that sense of, well, what's the metric? Right? And I think that in a way is also kind of a diet paradigm. How do I measure? And I'm not sure that it's measuring as much as it is observing. Do I feel content? Do I feel peaceful? Or is something going on? And what part of me needs tending?
Sure. Is there a story that you can share of a client that has had a transformation based on the ideas that we're talking about?
There are many. Yeah. Yeah. It's the single biggest reward, actually. I don't know that not one specifically comes to mind, but well, actually hundreds kind of come to mind all at once. But one thing I would say I always delight in seeing is when a client, actually I can think of one. I just thought of one in particular. I worked with a client who was just a delightful young woman. She was 18 when I started seeing her. She was a freshman at the University of Michigan. I'm in Ann Arbor. And she came in with just incredible body shame. She was always dieting, and either dieting or binging, and then all the body shame. And then she would, go okay, that's it. I'm going to be good tomorrow. She'd be good, meaning not eating anything, going for a run all day. Then she would end up binging again, this whole cycle. She was overweight by the BMI standards, had a history of weight-related bullying and just all kinds of body shame. And I remember what struck me was just how saddened I was that she just couldn't see how beautiful she was. She just had no conception, and I don't just mean physically, but just her. There was just no connection. She was looking absolutely outside of herself for validation that she was okay. I worked with her for some time, and over time she got better and better and better at listening to her own body, and herself in all kinds of different ways, setting limits with people. She changed her major. She went in, she was going to be an engineer because that's what everybody in her family did, and she realized she really wanted to be a painter. And so she figured out how to do that, which was lovely. And she got out of a relationship with a guy that was a mess for her, and found somebody who really cherished her. So I watched this evolution. And then just about 6 months ago, I think I got a lovely email from her saying that she just had a daughter, and that she is working to help her daughter just from the very beginning kind of sense her own body and listen to her cues and notice and respond when her daughter's hungry, and not, try to make her eat certain kinds of foods. Like, she's really conscious of wanting to stop the cycle. And that was really lovely. I mean, just to sort of feel like there's a little girl out there who might not go through any of what she went through or any of what I went through, right? But to really grow up trusting her body and making decisions from an organic wisdom, and whatever size she is what size she is. So that's what keeps me in the business.
I love that story so much. That's beautiful. When someone sees that for themselves and they see it for another, I think it's really powerful. And there's this question that keeps coming to mind. We have this, I'm sure you've got some insight around it, where, we look in the mirror, we see ourselves without our clothes on, and no matter what shape we're in or how good we think we look or how bad we think we look, we always tend to say, oh, my arm is a little this, my leg is a little that, I have a little cellulitis over there. Just like, there's always these judgments. Whether we say them to other people or not, we generally won't, but to ourselves, there's this inner dialogue. And I'd love to hear your opinion on how to deal with that, for one. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of it comes from society and conditioning of the way we're supposed to be and what perfect looks like. But I mean, your whole philosophy is that no human's perfect and our bodies have their own intelligence. And I'm sure the way we think about our bodies is really is an important piece.
I absolutely agree. And, part of kind of where I think about it is, this was a big struggle for me too, because looks were really important to my family. It was, and certainly, my friends, and, we were always kind of working on fixing something about our appearance. And so, I think this sort of idea that somehow our body's job is, for us to be able to look in the mirror without our clothes or without our makeup or whatever, and be completely happy. And I don't know that that's our body's job. If we think about our body's job is to be our home, not a billboard, right? This is where we live, but we treat it, I think, ultimately like it's an advertisement for us. And it says that we're okay or we're not okay. There's a tremendous amount of money to be made in that paradigm, right? Because nobody ever looks perfect, right? So there's always.
And even if you think you look perfect, it's for a fleeting moment, because age is going to happen to everybody, no matter how great you look.
Exactly right. Well, and we have that, we've been taught that setup of, perfect. Let's say for, a woman is, the average fashion model, I think it's 5'10" or 5'11" and weighs 110 pounds. That's a lower weight than, I think it's like 85% of American women. So when we look at that, this icon that's held up is young, it's typically white, it's extremely thin, it's wealthy, right? It has a very particular way of being in the world, and that's what we're supposed to aspire to. And I would suggest that that's not our body's first job, right? It's lovely to play with fashion and hair and makeup. So I love that stuff. Some people do, some people don't. I think that's fine. But it seems to me it should be a source of joy and play and delight, not a source of shame. And if we don't feel like it, that's fine too.
So what are some strategies around that have worked for you?
Mm-hmm. There are a number that I think there are a lot of different things. One is community. I think it's really valuable to connect with body acceptance, body positive communities. And the good news, that's one good piece of the internet. is that there is more of that out there. There's more writing about that out there. So that's the good news. There are books, there are podcasts, there's what we're doing right now, which is, wonderful to get that message out, that you really can feel at home and proud and good in your body right now, today, right this moment. There's a wonderful quote that someone sent me a while ago, and you've probably seen this. It says, trying to get a beach body, these are the steps. Get a body, go to the beach, which I just love. Again, this sort of idea that everybody should be able to go to the beach and enjoy and revel in the experience of the water and the sun and the sand, right? Right now, right? We're not around for a long time on this earth. We don't want to waste time preparing, it seems to me, to be acceptable, right? Our time is fleeting. I think we need to go to the beach. So to me, listening coming to identify those messages, and that's part of what I work on a lot with clients too, is listening for that narrative, right? Listening for, and it gets subtle over time typically. People get sneakier at shaming themselves. They get better at it. It gets more subtle. But learning those narratives.
Sure.
And really cognitively listening to it and beginning to challenge some of those narratives. Beginning to really think about, what is it that you bring to the table in this world? Is it your skin tone? Is it your abs? And there's nothing wrong with those things, but is there more to you than that? Because I think there is.
Sure. I mean, I really love that. And I think self-love and appreciation is a really big piece of this. And what changes in somebody when they are able to harness this way of thinking about themselves? What changes have you seen?
It is an absolute delight to watch. An absolute delight.
I bet.
I love it. It's my favorite thing. I see people come in, their posture changes. It's lovely. They come in and they just sit. They don't arrange themselves, so that they look the better. You can just see it. They inhabit their body. They sit and they move and they dress in ways that pay attention to what feels good. Their movements are lighter typically. They're in a much less of that sort of shame narrative. I think about, for my clients, and again, particularly with eating disorders, but I think this is true much more than just with the eating disorder clients. So many of my clients are hyper aware of how they appear all the time. How they look standing in line, how they look sitting on the bus, how they look, when they're teaching a class, whatever it is, this hyper awareness, because that's what we've been taught, right? That's body as billboard. So inhabiting is one of the biggest shifts that I see, and it's delightful. It's delightful.
Incredible. I mean, this work, Amy, that you're doing is just, aside from it's transforming lives, I mean, it's so needed, especially now when in our society, people are struggling with their body image and weight and self-love and just really appreciating who they are. I mean, it's the biggest gift. Our body is it's the most prized possession that we have. It's going to go with us everywhere we are. And if we're communicating with it in negative ways or mistreating it with our mind or what we put in our bodies, we're doing ourselves the biggest disservice. Everything else is secondary. And thank you so much for coming on to the show and sharing. Your wisdom is greatly appreciated by me and all the guests. And I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Mordechai. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Have a great day.